We are now at the end of the French 3 p.m. turn, and the French had no problems with troops being in command. And as far as the movement is concerned, on the left and center, there wasn't very much, because the French commander decided that if he charged straight in excuse me, with the forces presently disposed, you would have had no advantage over the defending troops at all, and been at a substantial disadvantage, because they're all stationary, and they all have a morale of 5, as do all of his troops as well. So they would have been meleeing with 6 dice per unit plus dedicated guns. These forces would have been meleeing with 4 dice per unit with dedicated guns. So they would have been at a definite disadvantage. So the idea was to try to improve on the situation for at least one turn. The clock is ticking, of course, desperately for the French, but to try to improve on the situation by having the now fully deployed French artillery, which is stationary, firing on the enemy, and also to be able to eject the skirmishers, if possible, from Piedmont, in order to be able to conduct some sort of operation on the flank of the Allied position. That was the general idea over there. So these units here remained and took on the stationary status. This unit advanced to attack Piedmont, and this unit moved forward slightly because it was convenient. The cavalry waiting patiently there, probably impatiently there. And then as we move over to the right of the French position, essentially Prince Jérôme's division of 4 brigades has continued to move forward. Some interesting maneuvers going on. We had the leading brigade was able to move up to this point here and form out of march column, and is now ready for combat. This unit here, still in march column, has come up alongside them. This unit still in march column, as we can see. This one has branched off in this direction. They now have the Etang, the lake, in front of them. Presumably they've got their eye on this unit of skirmishers, which is behind the wood that we can't see, which is right there. And then also the French have reinforcements in one cavalry brigade of Kellermann's division has arrived, and there's Kellermann himself, and there's the brigade, and it, as we can see, is in march column, moving as quickly as possible out to the French right. So we had morale tests for troops that were within the close range fire of the enemy or were in melee with the enemy. So of course there was a melee here because this unit charged the village of Piedmont. And then we had some morale checks here for being within close range of the enemy. Everybody passed their morale check. It was a close run thing here for both units, but they did pass their morale check. Then we had some firing from the French artillery, which caused no casualties, and we had the melee for the French brigade against the skirmishers, which we can see they're down there inside Piedmont. There was actually no result. There were no casualties from that, so it was a melee tie. And so that was then sorted out with a tie-breaking die roll, check for modifiers, and it turned out that the French scored 1 point higher in the die roll. So they won the melee tie, and they ejected the skirmishers. There were no casualties. They ejected the skirmishers. The skirmishers have retreated back half their normal move, but still facing the enemy. They've gone back to here, and the French were able to advance after combat, therefore, and so they have taken the village now. So that means that now the village can be treated effectively. The village can be treated as if it didn't exist. The troops can go rumbling through it happily. So that means that the infantry and the cavalry here are very excited about the possibilities of what they will be able to do next turn if nothing else has moved and interfered with them. And also an interesting point did occur to the French commander as these forces were moving up here. A unit is vulnerable if it's in march column, as this unit is here. And I thought, well, oh, no, I've betrayed who the French commander is. Well, there we go. I thought, or rather the French commander thought, is it wise to advance so close to the enemy? Because the word is that there are going to be Anglo-Allied reinforcements appearing, well, immediately, essentially. Is it wise to go so close to the enemy? Okay, the enemy coming from this direction here, while still in road column. But remember the special rule of this scenario. They cannot be attacked by troops that start out beyond 400 yards from their position. So whatever is coming at them has to stop when it's still 400 yards away. And then, of course, the French forces, in their turn, if they're being threatened like that, they can decide, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to reform out of march column back into standard formation. So they are actually not in danger of being attacked in road column in that position. So let's see. So there we go. That's the end of the second French turn, the 3 p.m. turn. So now we will move on to the Anglo-Allied 3 p.m. turn, in which we can expect to see substantial reinforcements arriving along the Brussels road. And here we are at the end of the Anglo-Allied 3 p.m. turn. That was their second turn, and we can see that up as we look up towards the Brussels road and Quatre itself. So Quatre, of course, remember, is here, and we can see that having come south from the Brussels road, which is this road here, we've had substantial reinforcements, those being the Allied Reserve Corps under the command of Lieutenant General Picton, who is the Corps commander, and also the Brunswick Corps under the command of the Duke of Brunswick, who is an army commander. And Picton has put his forces, he's got these 4 brigades here, and the 2 in the centre are shock troops, so very high quality troops, and they pack a punch. And then on either side of them, we have here and here, we have rather less than average quality Hanoverian troops. They have a morale of 4 in Volley and Bayonet, 5 being average and 6 being the morale of these troops here. So that's Picton's corps there. And there's Picton. And then over here, we have the Duke of Brunswick's forces. And we've got the Duke himself here. We've got a battery of field horse artillery. We've got Brunswick contingent infantry here and more Brunswick infantry over here. Then split off from that and commanded by von Heinemann from the Brunswick Corps, we have a unit of light cavalry which has been dispatched forward towards the French. Also coming off from Picton and Brunswick, they have stripped off 2 units of skirmishers. We have the Brunswick avant-garde and also the 95th Rifles. Now these are both sharpshooters, which means that they can cause significant trouble all by themselves. And what I've done with those is I've mounted 2 men on the skirmish base, whereas, for example, over here, this is just a common skirmisher, not sharpshooters, and he's just got 1 figure on the base. The idea here is to get these men forward, probably into the wood, come down here and be able to take pot shots at the French. Let's see, as far as, oh, and then over here also we had some army troops which are being led forward by the Prince of Orange. We've got a unit of Netherlands light cavalry here, which just appeared coming down from the Nivelles road, which is up in this direction up there. And they've come down here to put themselves in front of the French, cause a bit of trouble. They're morale class 4, so they are inferior troops, but we'll see what can be done. And of course they do have the Prince of Orange with them, so he could attach himself to them and give them a bit more oomph as a result. In terms of combat, well, basically the reinforcements arrived. There was no melee, nobody charged anyone, but there was a little bit of shooting. And the only results that we had were, before combat, there was, of course, any morale tests. And a morale test had to be taken again by this unit because it was within the close range and firing arc of the French artillery. And indeed, it failed its morale test, so became disordered. We can see our little puff of smoke there. And it has therefore lost its stationary status. I believe in the rules say from memory, I'm not going to look it up right now, but from memory the rules say that a disordered unit cannot become stationary, and I'm not entirely sure that there's actually anywhere in the rules that it says that if a stationary unit becomes disordered, it loses its stationary status. But that's how I'm playing it on advice. So I have removed the stationary marker there. So this unit is now disordered and not stationary, which makes it a prime target for the French. The other thing that's happened to this unit, not very much on the positive scale, was that the artillery, remember this is a fully deployed stationary French heavy battery, and it blasted away and not surprisingly was able to cause a casualty on this unit. So the French will be looking hungrily at that unit in their next turn. And then finally, in other news, far over on the French right here, we see that coming up from down here from the Namur road and over the bridge, and then up here, this is all in march column, because commanders can do march column just like anyone else, is His Grace the Duke of Wellington. And he's just crossed the marshy stream, he's over the other side of it, and so he's kept himself clear of the French. I'm sure they're waving as he goes by, and so he'll be popping up there to take charge of the battle very shortly. And I believe that's pretty much it. So just have a quick sweep around the battlefield, and that's the situation as it is, as we now draw into the 4 p.m. turn for the French. Here we are with the French having moved in their 4 p.m. turn, tested morale, and gone into combat. And it's kind of an unusual point in the proceedings, because I wanted to show the position of the troops at the point of combat. So it's not actually at the very end of the turn. The French deployment has continued, as we may imagine. Over here we had Bachelot with his two brigades, charged home against these Anglo-Allied brigade here. And also we had Foy with his 2 brigades charged against more of the same in this position. Both these units were stationary, remember, so a fairly hard nut to crack, but outnumbered 2-1 in each case. Then we had the French light cavalry over on this side with Piret Let's see, this first unit of lights moved through the village and then turned off in this direction, ready to worry the Netherlands light cavalry over there with the Prince of Orange. This unit of lancers basically sort of moved into a useful position. Things are getting very congested around here, so they've stopped on this side of the marshy stream. The horse battery was able to deploy and keep the Netherlands light cavalry in their sights. So that's a summary of what's happened there. Then down over here with Prince Jérôme's division, we've had this brigade here has moved forward so that in the next turn they would be in a position to be able to charge the village of Gémiancourt if they chose to so do. And they've got Ney up there with them for a bit of command leverage. Then the forces that were coming across this direction in march column have now got themselves back into fighting trim, as it were. The brigade that made it over there first has gone stationary. This brigade here is in position there, not yet stationary, and this is just following up, and as are the heavy cavalry also. So then we came to morale tests, which of course are done against any troops that are within close range of the enemy's weapons or are in melee. And so basically we were looking at this area here with these forces here. Now, what the interesting thing that happened there was there was an Anglo-Allied, it would have been a, I believe it was a Dutch brigade that was here, and it failed its morale test, and it was already disordered, so it routed. So they ran back here through the Bois de Bossu, and they've gone straight down that way. Okay, that left these two brigades now up against one brigade, and so that was the eventful morale check. Everybody else passed. Then we had our combat, which was of, I would say, pretty much average lethality, and but in both cases the French were able to win their melees, caused some casualties obviously, and took some casualties also. We do have some interesting points, so let's see, let's press on with the detail here. Both these units have lost the melee, so they will now be obliged to retreat, so they will make a move half their distance backwards, straight backwards. They will become disordered, but they will still be facing the enemy. And in terms of losses, we now have, let's see here, Dupé-Blanchet, who's here, his division, which can take 9 points of casualties, at which point it would become exhausted, has lost 7. So it can only take 2 more before it becomes exhausted. So it's in a pretty fragile state. Of course, these 2 units here are going to retreat, so they're moving backwards out of combat anyway, whether we like it or not. But they've put up a bit of resistance there against the French. And then as far as the French themselves, if I can just flip my paperwork a little bit here. As far as the French themselves, yes, they've taken some casualties, and the, let's see, Bachelou, who can take 4 damage points. So Bachelou is over here. Bachelou can take 4 damage points, and he's already taken 2. So that means that his division here is already halfway worn towards exhaustion. Okay. And so the final thing to do then will be to conduct those 2 retreats there. I'll do that, and then we'll take an overall look at the battlefield. And so here we are at the very end of the French 4 p.m. turn, and we can see now the Anglo-Allied units which have retreated in disorder. So they're still facing the enemy. They've moved half their distance straight backwards. So there's the one here and the one there. They're not slowed down by difficult terrain. They make their full, well, they do it based on their normal movement rate. So they've moved half back here and back here. The forces facing them have the option to take the enemy position, to advance to take the enemy position if they choose. And this brigade here has advanced to that position, and this brigade here has done likewise. And so there we are. That's the overview of the battlefield at the end of the French 4 p.m. turn, which is to say turn 3. And so now we're coming up to, naturally enough, the Anglo-Allied 4 p.m. turn, in which they will get yet more reinforcements. And as for the fate of their cause, he said, trying to think of something clever to say, we shall see. Right, now we find ourselves at the end of the movement which took place in the Anglo-Allied 4 p.m. turn, and there is, for sure, a lot going on. If we just, actually the most important thing that happened was Alton's division arrived, and that arrived over here on the Nivelles road, and it has basically gone straight forward to enter the forest here, which is the Bois de Bossu, and a lot of other things have happened too. So I'll work my way from left to right here. We've got the Prince of Orange, who has attached himself to the light cavalry, and that means that they will now be using a morale of 5, which makes them equivalent to the French lights here. So therefore, because they're basically even, I thought it was worth, or rather the Allied commander thought that it was worth taking a chance. This is an opportunity to be seized. He wants to use those cavalry to, well, they've charged the French lights here, and the idea is it's basically 50-50, and if they can cause them, if they lose the melee, they will be going back through these French troops here, which will help gum things up a bit for the French in this situation. That seemed to be a useful move with these chaps who are, at the end of the day, inferior light cavalry. So looked like a good opportunity there. We've had in the woods are starting to fill up with skirmishers, some of which now we see 2 figures on the base, which I've used to indicate sharpshooters. So they've been coming forward here. The brigades of Dupay-Ponchet's division have been withdrawn because the idea is to keep his division from becoming exhausted, because that is one of the victory conditions, of course, of the battle. So I don't want, if possible, I don't want his division to become exhausted. He's only got 2 more hits he can take, so therefore they're pulling out. They could still be held as a reserve, but so the 2 units that had retreated, that were in this sort of a region, this unit here and this unit here, they recovered from disorder, and then they made a free facing change, and because they were in woods, they moved half their move away from the enemy and have ended up here. Let's see, as we continue to move over, we can see then Alton's division, which started up there on the Nivelles road and has moved as far forward as it can. It's just about getting into the edges of the wood. We've got 3 brigades, one of which is shock troops, so there's definitely some punch there. They've also got we can see here, we can see 2 units of sharpshooter skirmishers. One is Hanoverian and one, I'll just say one isn't. I believe the other one is simply British, as far as I can remember. And they're now working their way through the woods and are going to be taking pot shots at the French. So the French are going to have a lot of skirmishing fire coming at them from the woods here. Then continuing to move across, we have got the Brunswick Light Cavalry, which is commanded here by von Heinemann. It was about here-ish, and what they've done is they've moved themselves across the other side of the Brussels road and have positioned themselves just outside of musket range to interfere with the French progress here. So let's see. Okay, fine. And they put themselves within 400 yards of the enemy. So if the enemy sits there and does nothing, they could potentially charge them next turn. We'll see what happens. The skirmishers here have remained in place because they want the village to be an obstacle for the French. If they moved out of there to save their skins, it would no longer be an obstacle for the French. The French could move through it here, for example. This brigade could go straight through it without any impediment. We don't want that happening. Okay. And then continuing to move over, we can see that the brigades of Picton and also Brunswick have become stationary with the stationary markers here, except for the very last brigade, which hadn't quite got up to the line, so they moved this turn, so they're not stationary, so they're now in position. And we've got Picton and His Grace the Duke of Brunswick in position there to command. And finally, you'll remember that Wellington had got about this far, and he then continued a circuit all the way around here, still in march column, and he's still in march column over there, and he has in fact made contact with the Dutch men of Perponchet, who were routed. So he's in contact with them, so they should be rallied next turn because they're in contact with the army commander. And there we are. So this is the end of movement. We haven't done morale tests yet. And of course we haven't done combat yet. So that's the situation as it stands at the present moment. And here we are now at the end of the Allied 4 p.m. turn. We've done morale and we've done combat. And in the morale tests, there wasn't much to be done in the way of testing. There was, of course, the melee here, and everybody passed. And then we got on to the melee, and it was all tied. The French lights had 1 casualty. The Dutch had 1 casualty. So the melee was tied. And then eventually the melee die rolls were made, and the French lost. So the French were beaten by the plucky Hollanders, and so they had to retreat half their normal move distance, which took them back to here. These men were passed through during the first half of that, so they became disordered, but they're not swept away, they're just in place and disordered. And then this battalion was passed through in the second half of the movement, so therefore it wasn't disordered. And then here we have the lights, who are now back here disordered. And so they've lost 1, and as I say, the Dutch lost 1 as well. So the nice thing about that for the Allies is that the Dutch light cavalry here are corps troops, so they don't affect any division exhaustion, whereas these troops do. They're just part of a normal division. So that actually is it. That is the end of the activity then entirely for the 4 p.m. turn. So we'll be moving on to, not surprisingly, the 5 p.m. turn. And let's just take a look at the reinforcement schedule as we pan around the battlefield a little bit here. In the 5 p.m. turn, we have actually no reinforcements scheduled as such. So we'll just slog it out. But I can tell you now that there was a sad footnote to the charge of the gallant Hollanders against the French chasseurs of Pirée. And you've probably already guessed it. I had neglected, when I computed the results, to test to see if the army commander that was attached to the Dutch unit was killed, because they did take losses. You roll a die, and if you roll a 6, the attached officer is killed. And sadly, the Prince of Orange, in the flower of his youth, was taken from us and is in fact dead. So now that's a bit of a hit, and it also means that those Dutch lights over there are rather more vulnerable than they were before, and the Anglo-Allies have lost one of their army commanders. And that's now officially the end of the 4 p.m. turn.